Okay, I'm calling the meeting to order. And we'll start with the protocols.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully everybody can hear us okay. We are usually the council meetings, we limit the discussion usually to the council, but if you want to interact or whatever, feel free to send me a chat on Zoom here. Let's see. So everybody's got their everybody's labeled, everybody's got their video correct. And so the last thing I'll say is just if for some reason we get interrupted in a way that doesn't allow us to carry on, we will end the meeting. I'll send out an email with a new link for everybody to join, and we can then rejoin and carry on our business from there. But otherwise, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So before I turn it over to the president, I did want to thank all of you for your consideration in changing the meeting, although ironically, I had planned to attend because we didn't do any shivas and I was done, but it did give me, and everybody had left except my sister and brother-in-law, so I'm sure they appreciated the 2 more hours. But the one thing I wanted to say is it made me realize that, I've been in office for 21 years and I've only missed 1 meeting. And the time that I missed it was, in 2009, I was in this leadership program at the Kennedy School. And that was before we had Zoom and cell phones and stuff. So I missed that meeting, but I haven't missed it. I can't believe I haven't missed any of the meetings. So I want to thank you in particular. I know it was Councilor Heller and Councilmember Kumar that insisted, so they get extra stars. But anyway, thank you for keeping my record intact, except for that 1 meeting. So with that, but everything's good. My mother led an incredible life. She lived almost 100 years. She was never in pain. She never was sick. And she went out on her own terms. She died in good health. She died. She was in 2 days before she died. The doctor came, and they gave her a COVID test and did blood work, and she had nothing was wrong with her. So, what a life, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't ask for anything more, right?
Yeah.
But thank you, everybody, for. I spent most of the time. Everybody thinks that they were my mother's closest friends, so. I have spent so much time, consoling that. Okay, well, thank you. And now we'll turn it over to our distinguished president.
Well, and all of our condolences.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we'll take a look at the agenda. First item is support for stop sign and speed camera legislation, in particular House Bill 367. The town's traffic committee has recommended that we send a letter of support for this legislation. The question is this, I don't know, Robin or Matt, you can give a little more background.
And lead on the traffic committee, so the issue more generally is that police, county police that we hire off duty do not do citations themselves. They can't.
Why run?
It's written into the stuff that Ron gathered for us, which is that they're required to take care of an urgent incident, and they can do that. But if they're issuing a citation, they basically just like anybody else, they have to call the police officer, and the police officer issues a citation. They can't do it themselves. So for things like running stop signs, they're just not going to do anything because they can't do it. And the same way we can't do it. So that's the background to why the police are not enforcing our stop signs or whatever. More generally, bringing cameras onto stop signs is a very equitable way to enforce that. Police officers do their best generally to be equitable in enforcement, but if you're human, you can show biases one way or the other. Cameras don't show biases. So it also is a safety consideration. And for municipalities without police forces, we have no other resource that does enforcement beyond relying on county police who are seldom in town. They're also understaffed at the moment, frankly. So that's why it makes a lot of sense then to have stop cameras, signs on stop, cameras on stop signs in town. There are actually two bills in the 23 House. We got one of them. The other one was a repeat from 2022, and Harris, I think is the name of the four delegates were behind it. Both of them died in the Transportation and Environment Committee. We didn't go further than that. There's a lot wrong with the bill that is there. That she's a junior person, put it together, and didn't have any sense. The critical issue is for municipalities to have these cameras and build on the legislation that has already been gone through the House. There are complications. The things that the Environment Committee, Transportation Environment Committee in the House objected to were municipalities just going to use this to get money. It's basically a bank for the municipalities, and we think that's inappropriate. And the other major reason against them was that some municipalities are going to straight into this. They're going to want cameras in every stop sign, and other municipalities are going to be laid back and not be concerned about it. And then going to get very uneven development, uneven enforcement across the state, and that's the problem with it. So those were why they were sent back. This bill was sent back for other reasons too. We'll go into that. There are answers to that, and indeed, but we need to show that we do need these cameras because people are running through our stop signs, and we have a school in town. So we need to show that it's important to have this type of protection.
Can I ask you a question about this? When you say about money, about if we had stop signs along Dorset Avenue, for example, and we gave tickets, does the town of Somerset get the money for that?
The way it's set up with speed cameras is the cities do get the money, yes, at the moment. So that doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that's the way it's set up. Right?
Well, I think right now that you can only get the money if you have your own police force. But maybe, I don't know what this bill says.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and add on to say that it coincides as well with a legislative priority of the Maryland Municipal League. So they have two legislative priorities for this upcoming session, and one of them is in essence to allow non-police officers to be the monitor of those cameras. So non-police officers can issue a ticket for a traffic violation.
Would that be you?
So it could be me or someone from a designated person, you know, within our municipality.
So you would have
staff.
to review the films.
Well, I think it's less about reviewing the film. It's more about the camera would capture it, but the ticket still has to come from a physical officer. So you get a notification that, you know, last night there were 2 stop sign violations on Dorset Avenue. And the system sends you that report. The police officer writes it up, and then Montgomery County gets the ticket for it. The bill would enable non-police officers to be the ones that are writing the ticket. So in this case, you know, we could set up a system, I get notified, I could send out the ticket, and then the town could get the
ticket for the owner of the vehicle. It's not for the driver, because you're only identifying it by license plate. You don't, so therefore it's a fine, but it's not on your driving record.
Right. a little vignette here is that when Connecticut Avenue put in their speed cameras, they cleaned up.
You
I
mean the Chevy.
Chevy Chase, yeah, they
Yes.
brought in so much
Yeah.
money.
Right.
And so people slowed down because, I don't know, if anybody here ever got a ticket. But so people learned and they slowed down, and then years after, Chevy Chase was complaining. Because they were using that revenue to fix roads and do things that were, I think.
And to pay for their police department.
Yeah, so I don't know where they are now. I don't know if people, what that traffic pattern is looking like. People are
Well,
still,
we should ask.
yeah,
Well, okay, let me say a couple things. First of all, years ago, when those cameras were invented, the county got a couple of them, and we sort of lobbied to try to have one put on, but they only had certain amounts, they were expensive. So we lobbied to try to get them to put it on Dorset. But, they only had limited number, and that wasn't a busy enough street. But anyway, so what I want to say is, I'm so delighted that the committee is urging the council to take a position on this. And remember, it's just draft legislation, so all the input that you all might have could eventually lead, when it's passed, hopefully when it's passed, some of the suggestions you have will be implemented. But what I wanted to say is that, we've talked in the past about having a legislative committee. And, but short of that, we can also encourage each of our committees to follow legislation and urge the council to take positions. Then if we do take a position on this, I definitely think that somebody should testify. Now it's so easy to testify in Annapolis because you can do it on Zoom. So you don't have to schlep to Annapolis. So I hope that if you do support this legislation, of course, it's not until next session that it starts in January. But I would hope that if you do support this legislation, that somebody will testify, whether it's a council member or the chair of the committee or anybody in town could do it on behalf of the town.
Yeah.
I mean, even our manager.
I'd say beyond that, two of our own District 16 representatives, Darrell Love and Mark Crummy, are on the Transportation Committee, and Mark Crummy is the chair of it. So, I mean, we can approach them directly and say, we're interested in this legislation.
Well, who is introducing it?
Well, it's
Who was it?
it was a Montgomery County.
The delegation.
Silver Spring.
But anyway, there's still good, more than likely it'll be scheduled for a hearing if Delegate Foreman is the chair. So then at the appropriate time, I hope somebody will, testify. It could be one of you, it could be the chair of the committee or member of the committee. But anyway, so I guess the point tonight is to decide whether we're gonna put this on the agenda for.
So my question is, this has been a great discussion, but what are we actually talking about putting on the agenda?
Well, support,
A lot.
it's support for legislation to allow municipalities to use automated enforcement devices for enforcement of their signage.
I had drafted tentatively a resolution in support of traffic camera monitoring and stop sign camera use. I didn't include it in this drive, but I have a draft that's in the October drive. So I had that we basically a resolution that says that the town supports traffic camera monitoring, supports for stop sign camera use, support for legislative action, and communication with legislators.
Well, can we agree to introduce that resolution for our October meeting?
Right, okay, great. And then if it gets approved, then we can provide that resolution to our state representative.
So maybe we can ask, for something like this, Mr. Town Attorney, can't this just go directly onto the agenda? Does it have to be introduced?
Well, technically, we do have in our policy introduction at one meeting of resolutions, and then discussion at a second meeting, but that policy does provide flexibility as the circumstances warrant. And given that the actual text of the resolution likely doesn't need to be introduced before a discussion, I think it would be fine to have it ready to go at the next meeting.
So that's your call, council. Because remember, this isn't a resolution that affects a policy in the town, or it's not on for a code.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is to advocate in another body. So it's really up to you. If you think that this should go out to our citizens so they can comment on it, because maybe they have some other ideas like Councilor Heller had. Or if you just want to go forward with it, because remember, more than likely, you know, whatever the delegation doesn't meet until I think December to decide what. So this is just like a generic thing, which will encourage them to introduce this again. So it's really your call. And it's all anything. I think anything you do would be very effective.
Especially since this is not a time urgent matter, my preference would be to introduce 1 month. So there's notification to the town, because residents, I can imagine some residents are very pro the use of these types of cameras, and other residents might be very anti-use of these cameras. And we shouldn't short circuit that
Right.
discussion. Okay, so. Kabir, does that sound good?
I agree.
Okay. But that said, in general, it seems like there is support for this approach. So that's great. I'd like to move ahead and support our committees as much as possible. Okay, legislation, ordinance, and resolutions. We've got 3 drafts. Thank you very much to Matt and Ron for pulling this together. Can you walk us through this?
Yes. Let me just get my stuff put in front, sorry. Okay, so there are 3 excuse me, two, we had discussed a couple of different pieces of legislation, and so we have 2 that we have drafts that are ready to go for introduction next month. The first has to do with stormwater drainage. So Ron and I were talking, and we're discussing kind of a quirk of our existing code where we require driveways to be replacement driveways to be of permeable materials, but we don't actually currently permit driveways. So this would actually make it so that we permit driveways, so that we have a clearer enforcement method for if there's an instance where outside the context of a full new build construction, somebody's replacing their driveway, that we can enforce this, which I think was in line with what the intent was behind this initially. And the second part of that is also in response to some of the council discussion relating to driveways. For further discussion is whether or not you wanted to require a variance if the proposed construction involves the alteration of the pre-construction slope, so it's more above 5%. I think that kind of covers it, Ron, and am I missing anything else that's important substantively?
No, you're not missing anything. I might just add that we're also cleaning up some language here and there. One thing that might be worth noting is that currently the code provides that with an ordinary permit application, there's supposed to be a description in written or diagram form indicating the direction and an approximate course of stormwater from the house or addition, like gutters and the like. But that's something that's not currently enforced, and that language predates the requirement for a stormwater drainage plan for new construction or construction creating increases of impervious surface over 150 square feet. So I was suggesting deleting the old language because it's, I think, been superseded by our new framework where we require the stormwater drainage plan just for those two triggers. Thank you, Matt.
Any discussion on
I mean,
this update?
the only issue is that the county, for good practical reasons, exempts the first 10 feet, whatever it is, from the house or from being permeable, right, because of the drainage back into the house. And do we want to say anything equivalent in our code, or do we just assume that the county code covers it?
So I think the county code and the stormwater design manual cover it, but my read of that manual remains that you can have permeable pavers all the way up to the house. You just have to have an underlayment buried beneath, like 3 feet down, that comes out 10 feet so that the water doesn't get into the house.
That's true, yes. So, but we don't want to put it in our own code, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think we need it. All right.
Our code does currently say that the requirements for the permeable driveway do not apply to the apron in front of a garage entrance.
Okay.
5 feet in length and 15 feet in width.
Should we change that or no?
I was wondering, could we briefly enumerate, sorry to interject, just what this proposes that's different? Can you just enumerate exactly how this is a difference from the existing code?
Sure.
Because on my initial read, I struggled to make a clear comparison.
Okay.
I apologize for that.
Sure, yeah. Most of it is cleanup language to address technical issues that we've discovered through application. The main substantive change is a result of application as well, where we noted that in a recent case, the code currently provides that new driveways have to be constructed of permeable materials, but a driveway having a slope of 5% or more is exempt. And the question was raised for us in an actual case recently. Well, does that mean the driveway once constructed after regrading potentially by a developer? Or does that mean the pre-construction slope is greater than 5%? And we discussed in that case how the code was capable of multiple interpretations, but I said it would be reasonable to interpret that to mean if proposed construction alters the existing grade to create a grade higher than 5%, that a variance would be required. And so if that's the direction council wants to go, then I would suggest we clarify that in the code, and the proposal in front of you would do that. It would say if a project results in a change of the grade such that it's 5% or more after the project is done, then a waiver or variance is necessary from that permeable paver requirement.
And just
You're muted.
on that piece, bottom line, we are basically saying if there's a new driveway and that goes 5%, which means it's sloping higher, that means more water drains off. We are saying the previous driveway was flatter. Our assumption there is that the previous driveway was flatter.
Correct. Yeah.
Because it could have been a 7% slope that's gone down to 5% slope. But our assumption there that it was less than 5% and it's gone up to 5%.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, another way perhaps to phrase it is this eliminates or closes a loophole where, you know, someone could avoid the permeable material requirement by intentionally grading their property to have a slope more than 5% for the driveway.
Say that again, sorry.
So right now, any new driveway has to have permeable materials. But if it's sloped higher than 5%, the water's just going to run off, and it's not permeable pavers aren't going to be effective. So we exempt those driveways over 5%. Now, one could argue that that creates a loophole. Someone who's replacing their driveway who doesn't want permeable materials could intentionally regrade their property so that the slope is 5% and they're then exempt from the permeable paver requirement. Does that make sense?
Right.
This language cleans it up so you can't do that?
Right. This
Says
edit
you need
would
a
say
waiver.
you can't do that and you'd need a variance.
But let's take a case where it's 4%
Mhm,
and not
okay.
5%. That could happen in a construction scenario. That is not meant to be an act of exercising a loophole.
Right.
How would we deal in a case like that?
Yeah, so if it was 4% before the project and 5% after, then they would need a waiver under the text as proposed.
Okay, and this last case that we looked at, what was it pre-construction that prompted this, as you said in your preamble? What what was the pre-construction grade?
I
I
recall
don't-
it's 3.5 degrees,
3.5%.
3.5%.
So it went from 3.5 to 5%.
7%, I think, wasn't it?
It went to 7.
Sorry, was it
Went
three?
to 7.
It
It
was
went to 7%. Great.
from 3.5 to 7%. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And okay, so in that case, they would have had to come to us for a variance for that.
Yes.
Just the grading of the driveway, not whether it's permeable or not.
Right, they'd have to explain why they should be exempted from the permeable materials requirement and why the increase in grading was necessary to address an unusual condition of the property and avoid a hardship.
So
But-
primarily increasing grading, just to be clear.
So,
Yeah,
can I ask one question? Because it seems to me like all of the new developers want to purposefully regrade and raise these houses. So, how does that work? Like, just do they need a variance for that, or you can just make your house higher?
well, they would need a variance if, like the recent case reviewed, the slope increases from 4% or less to 5% or more. Now, one policy consideration for the council is this a requirement that you want to impose if steeper driveways are going to be a custom, like you've noted, Shannon? I don't know if that's the case or not, because
Well,
you know, one thing that comes to my mind is essentially we might be promoting the design of houses around driveways, right or wrong. You know, so that's something for the council to think about.
Well, it seems to me that we don't really look at that difference of grading, like when we're studying like these building permits, because, you know, I think they all kind of do it, and I don't think it's necessarily to avoid a permeable driveway. I think it's to help push rain off their lots.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, like, you know, houses I've seen have been, you know, the ground is higher than pre-start ground. So, you know, that to me is a bigger issue almost, because when you raise your house, your next door neighbors have challenges because, you know, the grading goes to the lowest, you know, place.
What the builder did in response to our concerns was he found another way to capture the water from the driveway by putting a drain under it, and then it flows to his landscape infiltration.
Right.
And that worked. I mean, when we pushed our consultant, he said it's capturing about the same amount of water as a permeable driveway would have done. And I think that exactly is, then we'd approve a variance under those circumstances for that. So there are ways to handle the water other than a permeable driveway, but we want to hear them, and that's why we need the variance.
Exactly. It just forces that discussion.
And with this, this legislation, are we in a better position to say, no, you can't do that then?
No, you can't do what?
You can't, raise it up. You have to keep it, you know, at below 5%.
Yes, yeah, if an applicant does not meet their burden of demonstrating that a variance is warranted, then you know, if you were to deny that request, then they would have to design a project that conforms to the code without a variance.
And Ron, to Debbie's question, and both to you and Matt, what factors would we consider to be able to make that assessment? To
So
Shannon's
the,
point right now, right, we would get into you know, an issue that is less about the driveway and more about the full form and shape of the house and positioning of the house, and how would we make that discernment? I'm just wondering, just trying to sort of visualize that discussion. And you know, I don't want us to then hire yet another set of experts just to make that discernment. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on how that would happen, or any benchmarks from other towns?
sure, so in general, the variance review involves a two-step analysis. You know, one, is there something special or unique about the property, such as its shape, topography, groundwater, etc., that creates hardship or practical difficulty in strictly complying with the permeable driveway requirement? So first, the council has to find there's something unusual here, and that unusual condition creates a difficulty such that relief is warranted. So,
Well, and the way Robin, you were describing it, it was sort of the other side of this, which is, hey, I may be willing to give a variance because they're doing all these other things to capture the stormwater, if I heard you correctly, using the previous case as a sort of guide. So that is less about, you know, the practicalities around why you would have that increased slope.
I guess that made me think as well, and hearing Councilmember Barr's, if you know, one option we could look at is to try to get a sort of quantitative sense of what does the permeable driveway capture. So if instead we gave kind of a blueprint of here's what you, instead of just saying a variance and the council has to deal with all of these nebulous interconnected questions, if we might also explore, if you have a driveway that's over 5% slope, then you need to capture you know, 50% of a 1 year rainstorm, because that's the equivalent of what the permeable driveway would capture. And I think that sort of is to what Robin was saying, which is kind of what the application that raised this issue, how they tried to address it, but I was just wondering if it might make sense to have further discussion about kind of prescriptive measures that we can try to, make it work.
So,
I appreciate that, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt anyone. Sorry, I couldn't see who was speaking.
go ahead, Kabir.
I was just saying that, I'm sensitive also to maybe the line of questioning from Shannon that, like the next agenda item, which is building height, right? It's a cleaner, let's say it's a cleaner legislation. It's very defined, potentially, we know how to look at it, how to measure it. It will probably have the direct effect. Whereas this one, I feel, will we be effective at implementing it? Are we really talking about something else here, which is raised homes and sloping driveways? And should we look at that so that we are more direct? Those are the kinds of questions that come to my mind, in addition to, would we technically be in a position to discern and be effective here? I mean, even in the case that inspired this, Noah, sorry about that. Even in the case that inspired this, Robin's characterization put doubts in my mind that we probably would have given a variance, and so,
Okay,
I'm
sorry, let me try some language here that obviously it needs to be tidied, but the thought is this, that if they are raising the driveway above 5%, we put in the requirement that they must capture water equivalent to what would have been captured under the prior slope.
I think I appreciate that attempt, because I think we need like a framework to decide variance that is more than the generic framework we have for variance. That's much more specific here, because I think we would struggle. And then I don't want to lose the Shannon's point that, are we really tackling the real issue? And that's why I like the building height thing, because that's it's a clean issue. This is the height, anything above that, sorry. Whereas here, I feel we get into other elements of the construction that we may struggle to fully wrap our mind around.
Well, I don't really think that people should be able to raise their houses from where they sit. And I don't know what the code is for that from Montgomery County. And, I know we don't really talk about it, but it happens. And, we're kind of seeing it play out from this, now no one's able to do these driveways because they're all raising their houses. But I think that the raising of the houses comes before the inability to do the driveway.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you raise the house, so the slope is steeper.
Right.
Obviously. But then
it's not to
come
give
to us for variance and we say, sorry, you cannot make the slope steeper. What does that look? What kind of house does that look like at the end of the day? I don't know. It's probably a nothing burger, really, but it really raises some questions that I feel technically like it's harder, I think, for me to wrap my mind around.
I recommend that we try to keep some of these issues as distinct as possible, although they are clearly interrelated. From my perspective, this is a stormwater management issue. We put
Sorry,
in
are they
a requirement.
are they interrelated? I didn't understand that.
There are some interrelation, as Shannon indicated. You increase the height of, if you change the landscaping of the house, more water is going to, and you raise the soil, I think you run the chance of increasing the amount of water that will flow onto neighbors' properties. So that's a stormwater issue associated with raising it. But I think that for right now, we can just focus on the driveway. We have it in the code right now for stormwater management purposes. If the slope is less than 5 degrees, they need to make it permeable. And all we're saying is, we're not going to give you a loophole, so you can, if your other activities cause you to elevate the driveway, you need a waiver to do that. That's all we're saying. And I think I agree with Robin, if they propose a solution that captures the runoff, I would be inclined to approve the waiver, but they need to request the waiver. I don't see this as more complicated than that.
But the steepness of the driveway is connected to the overall construction. That's what I understand. I mean,
Yes,
you're assuming it's independent of the overall construction. I don't.
I'm not assuming it.
Oh, you're assuming it is connected.
It's all part of their plan. So if their plan includes this, they need to have an explanation for why they need to do it. The builder in the last house did have that explanation because of the size of the house, the slope of the property. And they needed to comply with some best practices to have the rear at a certain elevation. When it came forward, it effectively required an extra foot of soil in front of the house.
Be right back, Colin.
Okay. This seemed like a straightforward closing of the loop.
Right.
I don't understand what Spencer was talking about.
I'm left with, I'm in two minds, okay, one, we just leave it as is, which is attractive for many reasons, as written. The other is that rather than do it as a waiver, do it as they must. What I said earlier, which is they must capture as much water as would have been captured by the permeable driveway at the prior slope.
I appreciate that because
I'm good with that, Robin.
I appreciate that line of thinking. So we don't go the variance route, but sort of more additionally enforce the existing logic in the stormwater legislation. I appreciate that.
Ron, do you think you could adjust the language accordingly? I think that's a great idea that sort of keeps the focus on the stormwater management.
Yeah, I think that's a very elegant approach and would eliminate the burden and expense of a variance hearing, which is nice.
Yes, very nice.
Robin, how would you calculate the amount of runoff captured from a permeable driveway? Is that something that,
Well, a stormwater engineer can do that. Is the answer. We don't need to put it into our code. We just say it is the amount captured by the prior level. But there are figures for what a permeable driveway captures. It depends on the underlying soil. It's the kind of thing that stormwater engineer can do.
okay, great, yeah. So yeah, we could say something like if over 5% impermeable materials are not used, you must capture the amount of water from the driveway that would have been captured if permeable materials would have been used. And I'll play with that language a little bit and give you a new draft.
Great, thank you. And we'll plan to introduce that in October.
Okay.
Building height, which is an interesting topic, and you've been alluding to it, Shannon, so I'm glad we're going to be tackling that. Want to tee it up for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think this was one that was raised there was at least one project in particular that I think kind of brought this to mind for the council. And it highlighted that Somerset doesn't have any of our own regulations on building height. So we are dependent on the county in terms of what the numbers are, but also in how they measure it. And so in our discussions on it, I think where the council had landed was to do and Ron, correct me if I just stepped away, but we liked the approach that I think it was that the Village of Martin's Additions had used, which set a maximum building height, but did allow for a little bit of variance if it's kind of in keeping with the established building height in the area around it. So in other words, if you are in the middle of a bunch of houses that are much higher than the 32 feet, which is the maximum that we established, you can approach a higher number. But in general, it serves to set a standard for maximum building height in town.
That's
Um,
right, yeah.
yeah.
You can be eligible for up to an additional 2 feet. For 35 to, I'm sorry, 33 to 35, measured to the highest point.
33, yeah.
Why would we do that?
I think the reason, well, maybe I'll turn it over to the council because it was
If
sort
the
of
idea is
curious.
to keep to a certain height, why would we give a variance for more height?
Well, if the buildings, if houses, buildings around it are higher to start with, then it can be higher too. It's what that's basically said.
Yeah, another way to think of it is the regulations are aimed at preserving existing character. So if the existing character of a particular street is that height is already 35, then it might not make sense to restrict someone to 33 feet when all their neighbors are already at 35.
Except that, you know, we're trying to fix mistakes. And I think we should set a rule, and I just because the guy next door to me is huge, because it slipped by, we didn't have a regulation, why? It just lets all the other houses go, well, you know, I'm on the game, you know, they're tall, why can't I be as tall? I don't think we should allow it, but maybe this is something for us to debate later on, you know.
Well, I mean, it is certainly something to debate. This is a work session, we discuss, we don't vote.
Do-
But, I mean, it is established building height, which means not just one house, it's actually average of all houses around.
Does anyone know, like what a building, if a developer was to make a house, and of course, there's gonna be high ceilings, you know, on all the floors, or, you know, if there's high ceiling on the first floor at least, and then a second story, and then a third attic-y story, how tall would that be? Does anyone know?
That's me, but
Around 30 feet, I think.
yeah, I would think,
Around.
10, 10, and 10.
I would think not, maybe 9, 9, and 5 or something.
What's a standard height, you know, in a room? Is there a standard?
Probably 12, 10, and 8, actually, it should go up, but,
Like, it's 8 or 9 feet to the ceiling,
8 or 9 feet,
depending.
so if you have 3 floors, that's
then on
27.
the sloping roof, that gives you another 5 feet.
Um,
Can you make a 3-story house with a basement under 35?
Yes, you can. You've got to be careful with your roof, because that could put you over. But yes, you can.
So like if we limit. Oh, so you can still, if someone like, oh my God, I have to have a 3rd story, they would still be able to fall into that height requirement.
The county may have a 2.5 story limit. I believe they did. I'll see if it's still there. Maybe Doug knows.
What's the house on Greystone? How many floors is that?
It's 3.
That's 3?
Hey, Ron, I don't recall whether they
Okay,
do or
thank you,
not.
buddy.
Well, I think that house, Debbie, got a variance for height.
No.
It was before me, so I don't know,
Greystone.
but that's what I had heard.
It didn't get a variance, but the county did not count the landing up out on top of the roof as part of its height measurement.
The elevator
So-
shaft.
So there was an elevator on this particular project that was higher than.
Would
But
a chimney count? You know, how do chimneys fit in?
the,
It was a height.
they don't count the way, well, at least the way that Ron had written it, which I think is in keeping with the municipalities around us, is that it's measured to the highest point of the roof. So this,
What is the, for Doug or Matt, what is the county's maximum height right now?
35.
35. So for like the baseline house, we're actually lowering that maximum in Somerset
Yeah, there's,
By 2 feet, but if the other house is in a similar fashion to calculating setback, if the other houses along the street are higher houses, then they go up to the county limit of 35.
that's right. And the other element that we are adding that is different than the county is the county says you either can have a max height of 35 feet or a mean height of, I think, is it 30 or 32, Ron or Doug? But in any, no matter what it is.
30.
30, so but it's either or, so you can have a mean height of 33 feet. As long as your max is under 35, or you could have a mean height of 30 and your max could be 36 feet. So we're saying both have to apply as well. So there's the shrinking of two feet, as you said, but then there's the and element that's different.
So as with some of our other code revisions, I think this is a step forward, and we will see over time as to, does it control some of the McMansions the way we want it to, or is it too much or too little? I think it
And-
might be too little, but it's a conservative step.
And I'd say that it seems that most of us here are against the McMansions, but we don't know how the rest of the town feels.
Absolutely. So this,
Yeah.
obviously, this.
Some of those who live in the big mansions might have different.
That's right.
Ideas, yes.
Or people that aspire to a much bigger house. I think, hey, I don't want to be held back in the future if I can go up, but. I think, we represent the town, but I think we need to hear from residents,
Absolutely.
Well, there were also. Years ago, there were people that were violently opposed to changing anything because they lived in houses that were built mid-century, that were small, but they wanted to maximize, they were gonna retire. And they wanted to make sure that the purchaser knew they could build a big mansion, which is what the market is. Right. And that's why, like on Warwick Place, in that one block of this, every house has been torn down.
Okay, any issues or concerns with bringing this forward?
Well, one issue, I just want everybody to be aware and decide if you want it, which is that the administrative exception, which covers the established building height, currently reads the mayor may have fund funding of established building height. See the statute in paragraph.
I did change that to town council.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah,
Thank
this-
you. Good catch. You have to
That's what
control,
they-
control this power.
Yeah, I mean, that's, there's a lot of stuff written in our code. Because that's what Mayor Bear wrote a lot of those things.
All right, okay,
Matt?
thank you.
Matt and Ron, the 33 feet data, the 33 feet is based on what again?
That was based on the Village of Martin's additions, and if you pull up the August work session. Again, I could actually, if you want, I could share my screen to
No,
remind.
I remember that, but do you have data on our homes and sort of what the height has been?
Well, the way that we had looked at it was, we took kind of a sampling of 7 homes or so and looked at the municipalities that did have a height requirement within their code and how that would affect it or not.
But all of these are the sample of 7 homes?
Yes,
Most of them are on Cumberland.
yes.
So, okay. Did we look at the most recent new building permits we've awarded and what have been the average heights?
Well, Cumberland were 2 of the more recent ones, and then Trent as well. So those are on there. We've had 3 recent ones on Cumberland, so that's why there were so many on Cumberland. We had the 2 at the end here, and then Shannon's neighbor. And then, Trent Greystone was one that, kind of raised this issue for a lot of people in town. So that was kind of why we chose this sample.
And Greystone, that's 5522.
Correct.
wasn't that 43 feet?
I believe that had to do with. That included the elevator shaft up at the top, which the county did not include in its calculation, so that's why it's the 34.4 feet or whatever it was.
Okay, so in this case, they would have been a foot over our minimum that we are proposing.
Correct.
And then how would we have considered?
Well, actually, they would have been 3 feet above our maximum because it's a flat roof, so they would have been 4 feet above our mean height as well.
And the town would not grant the same exemption that the county grants for things on the roof. The county has a provision in its code that provides height excludes certain things that may be installed on a roof, like a windmill. I was surprised that they interpreted it to include the elevator shaft, because the other items in their list of exemptions, as I recall, didn't represent any habitable space. They were just sort of ornamental features. So that interpretation did surprise me, but you know, the town wouldn't have to grant that same exemption for an elevator shaft or gazebo or whatever might be installed there.
And Matt,
Do we have any
So Matt-
view on whether, sorry. Go ahead.
I think Doug, were
I
you?
just want to also explain that at 5522 Greystone, county measures from the flat roof. It doesn't count the parapet that surrounds the roof. So that part exceeds the county or what you are proposing also. So that might be something you might want to clarify in the code, how you address a flat roof.
And the other question I have, I just want to get confidence on the standard we are setting. I'm in favor of obviously this legislation, but we want to make sure that it's not, hey, we looked at 7 homes. Hey, Martin's Addition has this limit, which is not our neighborhood. And I just want to be clear about all of those elements of what we're putting into this so that we are able to rationalize to the residents we represent. I also want to be very clear when we say 28 feet, how many homes would be suddenly, while we are not retroactively applying this, but as you can imagine, it would raise concerns in the town. So how many homes would retroactively suddenly be in violation of this? I would love to have a perspective on that before we move forward. Even if I don't think it would change my mind that we should have a restriction, but it would be good to know from this random sampling, emphasis on random, that you provided. I think a lot of homes might be following, higher than the standard in town. So I think there would be a legitimate question from residents. What does this mean for the existing homes?
Right. Good question, and maybe Doug and Matt and town staff, Doug can do a little bit of research. I don't think it is a random sample. I think it was a time sample. So they just looked at the most recent, or largely looked at the most recent homes,
New construction.
which are new construction, which are generally McMansions, but that doesn't mean that the 400 plus houses in Somerset are represented by that. It's just new construction is represented by that.
And obviously it does not affect existing homes. Which is what.
I understand, but
Yeah, that's a good question.
thank you for that. I think we would face those questions. That's all I'm saying, and I think we should just be clear what our standard is. I would not accept, if I was a resident, that our standard is based on Martin's Addition.
Well, okay.
I would not
so
accept that our
Another
standard.
thing, another thing related to what you're saying that I suggest is, once you come up with some ideas, you might want to bring in, architects or builders to, so they could explain what impact that might have. Because as some council members have surmised, that there still might be a way to design houses that are highly desirable and be within whatever changes you're proposing.
I
So
agree with that.
you want to get, before you make these kind of decisions, you want to get as much information as possible and as much input. But I would guess that a creative architect will still be able to design something that is very valuable, that is more in keeping with the character of the town. But
Yeah.
that's why this is also interesting and challenging at the same time.
I think the framing of the legislation, from my read of it, Ron, adds up in my mind. I'm just want to get precise on the threshold we are setting and make sure we are benchmarking it appropriately. So, and we can do that between now and the council session, if it's possible to do it via email and so on, just get some confidence behind this. I wouldn't want to do this because it's at Martin's Edition. I wouldn't want to do this. I would want the sampling to be build some confidence. I would want to have an eye on whether how many of our existing properties would this potentially cover, because that's what the residents will be thinking, and so we want to make sure that we are walking into this with eyes wide open.
Absolutely. But we have sufficient interest to introduce it in October, and then we'll have more time to consider and solicit town resident input. Let me just rephrase the question. I would like to introduce it in October. Are there any other council members that would want to introduce it in October?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to see the threshold data for sure before I can support that. I'm sorry. I don't, the 33 number seems unclear to me. What is it grounded in right now? So there's no impatience on this. We can get this right. This will have widespread implication for future construction. It would be good to do it properly, like all things, and it would be good to be very clear what the 33 feet or the 28 feet rather number is coming from.
It's a 33-foot number. Interesting enough, came to your point of the survey, Kabir. I think that the question that might be more interest to residents is how many homes have not been renovated and could possibly be constrained in their renovation in a tear down by this code amendment.
Is 33 feet really a constraint?
It would have constrained like 5 of those homes in that sample.
But it's not like
Stop.
it's not only the houses that haven't been altered. There might be in the future changes that citizens want to make on houses that were tear downs.
Right, that's true.
Because that's going to happen in the next round of gentrification, so to speak. Because soon the houses that have been built in the last 5 years that we think are so large, the new when they get sold, the new owners might want even bigger houses.
I totally agree with that. I think the McMansion language should probably be avoided, especially in council deliberation. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I think we need sort of clear definitions of size relative to property and letter to the coverage. I think that's what Shannon has been at the highest level getting at, because we kind of operate on subjective perspectives rather than sort of what is reasonable in that situation. Just a throwaway comment. Sorry.
And then another thing, remember in the past, you talked about the possibility of having different standards on different blocks, which I think the town attorney said you could.
Yes,
do it.
that was the other, I think it was Shannon who again brought that up. I think it did.
Yeah.
But that was another question on my mind in as part of this is how are we treating that, Ron?
That is the concept of established building height. That's what that does.
It's exactly it.
Say that again?
That is the concept of established building height. In other words, looking at the immediate neighborhood around you to see how tall, how homes are, and whether you can get that exception to 35 feet. So that is the block by block standard under that's what established building height is.
Except I appreciate Debbie's sort of response because, does that mean every home on Greystone will start edging up?
I hate for that house on Greystone to be the standard.
Well, if you take 36 feet and 12 feet, which is what the neighbor is to it, the average is well under 35 feet. So it's got a long way to go, that particular neighborhood, before you can get an exception in that area.
Yep, and I see Ron nodding his head. Great discussion, and we'll be discussing it more, I am sure. Thank you, okay. Moving on to the next item, youth council proposal. Thank you for moving this along, EJ. Do you want to talk about it or Matt?
I can say a couple words. Great. So the proposal has been updated after the last work session. Namely, it's been shortened so that the first group would be able to kind of draft the exact specifics of a charter.
Right.
So this would be a pilot program that would run from January to May 2024, aka the second semester of the school year. For this pilot, in the proposal, excuse me, it is currently between 9th and 12th grade, and after the pilot, we would think would be kind of evaluated and see about expanding it to other grades. And then it's taken in feedback from the council. Since then, I've also heard from several youth. They have a couple youth, and they had no criticisms. They sounded like this would be something that they would be interested in. And then before the kind of only remaining at-large things, questions for the council, found at the bottom of the proposal is if this program is voted on and approved, when we start getting applicants, who decides which applicants are accepted, as well as other potential eligibility requirements besides being a resident of Somerset, being able to fulfill the responsibilities and being able to set an example for youth in the community. And that's all I have. I don't know if Matt has anything else.
No.
I think it's great. So is this for the council to vote on?
Yeah,
October?
I think what we were working on is putting the proposal that EJ's put together in the form of a resolution for the council to either adopt, or if you want, introduce. I think we were thinking we could just adopt it in October, so then we can start advertising and get people in.
Absolutely.
But as EJ said, I think that there were a few kind of smaller questions that the council might offer guidance on. If you wanted to require participants to be registered to vote in Somerset municipal elections, if we wanted to set a minimum GPA, and then really just I think the last one was just how applicants are select.
They all have 4
They have more. Can't you get over 4 in
I think
Montgomery
so,
County?
yeah, because they have weighted
weighted,
GPA, right?
They're
It's
all
real-
geniuses.
I'm sure EJ sent all the research on how smart, it's like what we are called. Well, private schools have great inflation.
We all.
But currently, I mean, in terms of like what it would look like, we set it up. The proposal right now as written is that the mayor and one council member serves as the advisor. So attends meetings and provides advice, support. And then our staff will have a youth council facilitator who helps with, most of the actual planning of their curriculum and arranging for people, things like that.
So, I'm sorry, it's a good question. I'm looking at these other possible requirements. Are we going to flesh that out now or do it when we vote on it?
If you have strong feelings now, we can update it. Otherwise, the way that I have it drafted right now is on Monday. I just highlighted some of the potential ones, so you can either easily just strike them or
Okay.
amend them.
We'll do that Monday then.
Either way, yeah,
Right.
yep.
I have a couple of quick reactions. While I'm delighted that we've taken revenue fee generation to heart, I'm not clear whether we need to charge an application fee and make that the council's budget. So I would consider eliminating that. To be honest with you, I think that the interview, my son applied for the Maryland Youth Council, and I don't know if there was a GPA requirement, but there was definitely a write-up, an essay and a questionnaire requirement, I think.
He got appointed, didn't he?
No, he didn't, actually, he didn't get appointed, so, but he
He
did
did
apply.
get appointed, right?
He did not.
What?
So, he's a
That's
junior,
horrible.
he'll try again, he'll try
They'll join
again.
our Somerset Youth Council.
That is horrible.
He'll try again as a senior. I
Must've been
think there's a
really
premium,
bad.
I think there's a premium on seniors, which I understand.
Yeah, he has an
But-
in on this
That
council.
is ridiculous.
Don't
but
worry, he's
I
got an
think-
in on this council.
But I think that that felt like a compelling process to, kind of write that essay and then the interview. I think that there should be an interview process. But I wouldn't worry about, other factors, because I think there could be, leaders hidden behind low GPAs.
I think you gotta have Karen consent form. I don't think you have to be registered to vote. What do we care?
Right, this and my.
Yeah.
We want to keep it on.
All right, we can do this Monday night.
Right,
Okay.
so we'll discuss it, we'll vote on it. I think this has been widely discussed at previous meetings. The town's aware of it. I think my sense is that there's strong support for this sort of activity. So,
And advertised in the last two town journals.
thank you, yes.
Have we had, have people, have some of our youth, like, are people knocking on the door or just like a few?
We've proactively reached out to a handful of young people in town, so. Hopefully.
I think my son told me he got a note from EJ. I don't know if he responded to you, EJ. He's delinquent.
He did.
Okay. But I also agree with Steve. I think this is great, and thank you for Debbie for pushing it, and EJ, thank you for your leadership and making it happen.
Yeah.
So looking forward to voting on it.
Okay. Police security, next item.
Yeah, so I don't know on this one, I don't know that we got to the point where there's any specific action that we're looking to take necessarily. But I sort of laid out kind of our current arrangement and yeah, Councilmember Rovak might
So, with Mr. Khanna, who came in to our council meeting last meeting, I'm trying to think when this all was, brought up some like very good points that, I think that we all have these questions in terms of, what are the goals of our police department or the police program that we have? What do they do? Robin indicated tonight that, they do not stop people and issue tickets for traffic violations. And there's a lot of different things that, we've learned through this process, they may or may not be doing. So what it was really about was like, taking the public safety committee, really like wants to kind of look at the program as a whole and make some recommendations on what we should do with this program going forward. And maybe one of the questions is should we continue on with this program the way that it stands now? And perhaps we look for other alternatives. I know that in the past, there's been a discussion about trying to get some pricing from security officers that maybe aren't part of the police department, but you know, do freelance work like that. And I don't know where that stands, if that's ever happened or not. But that would be kind of fall under this guise too, as we're all kind of re-looking with open eyes of this program and what should this look like in the future.
Thank you for your engagement with the Public Safety Committee.
Just say this letter was what I was referring to in the initial topic, which is that the police officers are not giving tickets, and so the traffic committee is looking at other ways to try to enforce our stop times, and that's why the letter.
Absolutely, and it's my understanding that the initial reason or the initial vision or objective of engaging the police was by the traffic committee.
Right.
For traffic
For
safety.
stop signs and speeding, and then once they came in, then nobody wanted to get a ticket.
But
Right.
it turns out they can't ticket
But they
them.
can't. So then what is the objective? And my sense from the Public Safety Committee is that they do not have they're not recommending that we continue to use
That we what?
county police. That the Public Safety Committee is not recommending continued use of Montgomery County Police for public safety. I don't think they have an alternative recommendation.
Right, yeah, I mean, they're saying for traffic enforcement, it's a traffic committee. So it's not public safety, it's for traffic enforcement that. they're
Yeah, I
saying.
don't think the Public Safety Committee has said that we shouldn't be using them. I think that it's just what do we, you know, what do we get from this, and like looking at it in terms of, you know, we pay a lot of money. People get angry that the police just sit in one area. You know, they're here about 8% of the time.
Yes, they can. I don't.
You know, they're not allowed to stop anyone.
Wait a minute, where did you get that information? Where is this information they can't give a ticket for a stop sign? I don't think that's correct.
That's, I think it was Ron collected that.
Yeah, it's like a secondary use of the vehicle, and they can't drive. We've kind of
Because that, in the beginning, they gave ticket, when we first hired them, they could give tickets. So did we get that from Ron?
I thought that there's like a bargaining agreement.
I believe I provided a copy of the collective bargaining agreement and the Montgomery County regulations for secondary employment. And I mean, there are lots of provisions. I'll just give you some highlights. There's one provision that states officers are allowed to drive their vehicles to the secondary employment location, but they're not allowed to patrol around the town unless the town pays for the fair use of that vehicle. Now, there's another provision that allows the officers to be assigned to selective traffic enforcement. So you can, I believe, in my opinion, say, we think this particular stop sign is problematic. Please park your car there and monitor that stop sign. That's allowed, but they're not allowed to patrol around the town.
So perhaps, what is the date of that maybe that was in a new collective bargaining agreement that took place after, because we've had these officers for 20 years. So that must have been in a new agreement, don't you think? Because
I don't know, Mr. Mayor. I'd have to look that up.
we'll have to ask. We can ask.
But I have heard officers who are secondarily employed say that that there are political considerations as well, because often what happens is most of the tickets that are issued to residents.
Yeah,
It's not
right, yes.
commuter traffic.
Right, well, that was, what I was talking about, but.
Well, they give out a lot of warnings.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense because the price that we're paying is so cheap per hour. That's probably why something was negotiated with those extra costs. Because I mean, I think when we first hired them 20 years ago, it was like $20 an hour or something. It was just. So
Well,
anyway,
I believe that it's about 65,000, anywhere from 55 to 65,000 a year that we pay.
no, but I'm talking about the per hour rate.
Per hour rate is about $60.
But it's still we're still getting, just by having them here, we're still getting. A lot of value for the price we're paying, because I'm sure it costs way more, that car costs a fortune. So anyway, this is all very good information.
So
And
There's
really
one other
why-
issue, Mr. Mayor. I've never run this to ground, but there's also statements in the collective bargaining agreement that provide the secondary employment is not allowed to interfere with the officer's primary employment. And one thing that comes to my mind there is if tickets are issued, the officers potentially have to appear in court for the prosecution of those citations. And if
Right.
their appearance is on a day where they're not working for the town and they're working for the county, then
Right, they don't get, then the ticket would get waived. So these are all very strong arguments for the council to be considering alternatives such as private security. And that's something we've been,
I want to say
we need to look at all the alternatives,
Right.
see what's most effective.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, just in terms of what, the other thing we can look at is like what we want them to do. And, if we don't want them to be down at that stop sign on Fallstone and Warwick, and, as Mr. Khan has suggested, he would like to see them closer to the school, or, if we can come up with as a whole, what we kind of want, what our goal from them is.
Right.
But I just don't know that, I certainly can't answer, what it is and why they do what they do, and what that deters or not, or, any of that. But I know it's come up kind of quite a bit.
Well, those are all really good questions, but this all goes back to years ago. I don't think this current collective bargaining agreement was in effect. And also, when we hired them, as I've said many times, like a broken record, we never gave them any direction.
Mhm.
And the staff, as we've had different town managers, they didn't know what, so it's good that finally we're addressing it. Just like with the street lights, that you're finally, this council has the opportunity to make some real good policy decisions.
I tend to agree with Shannon. It would be useful. Maybe we can just dedicate a session, Shannon, a working session, to identify what goals we want. From the existing options we have with policing, given the constraints Ron has defined. What can we do to get the most value? I would agree with the mayor. I think it may seem like a chunk of cash, but I actually think it is potentially relatively inexpensive compared to other options. And we probably are getting a bargain in terms of the underlying costs that are associated with this. And the third thing I would say, and I noticed in the note that Alcott is retiring, and there might be an option to hire him. Officer Alcott, who's one of the officers.
Yeah.
By the way, I still recommend we invite them and we meet them as a council. I think they are generally impressive with what I would offer, and I think they generally really care about our town. And I would consider that option. I am mildly anxious about not only the optics, but other questions around our own private force in town. That I'm not sure whether we should go down that path or
Well,
entertain.
remember Kenwood, a lot of unincorporated.
That
areas
alone,
in
if Kenwood
Connecticut-
has it, that alone is a reason I would
Okay.
question it.
There
So-
are other, I mean, you have to look at all, you have to study all the alternatives and
Right.
the pros and cons.
Yeah, I'm
So-
only expressing mild anxiety on the optics of it. I'm happy to study all of it, but
I understand.
So do we want, and I'll go to you just one thing, but do we want to ask or direct the Public Safety Committee to do some sort of a study or assessment along those lines, to look at the different options?
I think Shannon's suggestion that as a council, can we kind of articulate what we want, from policing? I don't know if that's what you were
Well,
implying,
I'd like
Shannon,
to
but
hear
I
what
would
the
be in
committees-
support of that. Although they're not mutually exclusive, we could do both.
I'd like to hear what the Public Safety Committee has to say. I think they've worked really hard. And I think they have some real opinions, and I'd love for them to give us their laundry list before we would sit down with and decide what we want. I'd love to hear their laundry list, and then we put that together.
Yeah,
And go from there.
Right.
I would want to I would want to address this subject, without hearing from the Public Safety Committee, quite frankly. And maybe they even come in here and do it with us. But the other thing is, as to private security, I think we need to look around and see if that sort of thing makes sense. I don't think the optics are bad. I don't, I'd be interested to just chat with you about that and then off screen here. But, I know this past weekend at my synagogue, we had private security. They were fabulous. And so I'd love to see what the other communities are doing, what it costs, how they use them, and what makes sense for us. And then we put it all together, we decide what to do.
First of all, most of the private security are former police officers.
Right.
And, but it's just, and then, actually, I think, President Sergo and I have been promising, you that we would have the police at a work session, so,
That would be good. I think that would be good for all
Yeah.
of us.
yeah.
But I appreciate your points, Debbie. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, maybe we can have Public Safety Committee actually come in at our next work.
Well, they could, the committee could come at the same time.
Okay,
the
Quick
committee's
discussion?
meeting, I don't know, I think it's next week or maybe the 10th. And I know they're gonna be discussing this.
We can have as part of our agenda in a work session, a joint meeting between the council and the committee.
A good idea.
okay, building structure study, this would be a longer term effort to understand the character of the town, the building character of the town. From all the different perspectives, size, setback, landscaping, style, age. Is this something of interest? Can you provide a little more background?
Yeah, and I think this speaks a little bit to Councilmember Kumar's questions about building heights, if what we want, there's a lot of, there's many elements of our code that we currently do not have any regulations that are available to us and that are in some of our neighboring municipalities, as an example, that exist in the state or at the county level. I think in general, there's some concern about house sizes and the contributions to stormwater in particular. I think some of the issues that have been raised, specifically about building coverage and impervious surface coverage was one of the really big ones. But even building heights, and then, revisiting setbacks, things like that, all these things that in order to get a good sense of what exists, which can help better inform what we want to preserve or what we want the character of the town to reflect, what we want our code to reflect. A lot of our neighboring municipalities have hired either an urban planner or different firms of that nature to do a more comprehensive study of the existing housing stock, what it looks like, what different code requirements, how that would affect future construction or existing houses. And so, with that in mind, I put together kind of a draft RFP. I highlighted some of the areas where the language might need some massaging, but I thought, you know, a review of existing houses, a good sampling assessment, whether new construction is significantly changing dimensions of houses in town, identifying discrete elements that kind of define housing in Somerset, whether there's been a change over time, whether our existing code is sufficient, where it's deficient, where, you know, any changes that might be recommended on our existing code. And then ways that we can communicate the study to residents, ways that we can engage residents in it. All of these things. I think that the thing to keep in mind on this is I think this would be a big undertaking. It would be a big project, and some of our neighbors that did this, it was a year-long study, or even longer. Than Ron might be able to speak to this. I think Ron has experience, but I think some of them were even, you know, 18 months, 2 years, that it was a really comprehensive thing where they followed a similar model to what we did with stormwater, where they got a citizen committee that was involved and all that. But I drafted an RFP to kind of give you an idea of what that might look like as a starting point, and give you an opportunity to kind of discuss whether it's worth exploring more, whether it's worth putting an RFP out there. The one thing is I don't have a great sense of what the cost would be for it. So that makes it difficult to really give it serious consideration without knowing what the price tag is on it. But in any case, that kind of sums it up, I think.
So, and what are you looking for from us now? Do you want us to talk about it a bit, or you want us to think about it, and we'll come back at the next work session?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Maybe just feedback at the next work session, or between now and the next work session, and we can continue to work on this about, next steps. But I think where this came out of was the building heights. The questions that Councilmember Kumar raised, notwithstanding, was the council generally felt like there was a threshold there that we were comfortable moving forward with. But with the building coverage in particular, I think it was a question of where do we even start with this? What does it look like now? What do we want it to look like? Right. And we need a more technical look at this before we start to make
a
this
comprehensive study.
We know that, and it's something that I think the mayor has talked about as well as a possibility for for a while now.
Right. The mayor's talked about it, perhaps expanding the historic district in Somerset
to the entire town.
To the entire town.
Good luck with that.
Good luck with that.
You'll all get voted out of office.
But
It'll be for the good of the town.
And it may be too late to maintain some of that, mid-century modern look that the town had in some areas, but it's a shame.
I mean, I just feel like there's just so many different styles. Like, it's just, every house and block is different in Somerset. So I don't know that we would really have a collective answer. I mean, the houses on the other side of Cumberland have gigantic lots, and the ones on, Grantham tend to be more mid-century. And, it really varies, like almost street by street, I think.
Right.
Well, it depends on which, because, I think, and you all probably know, but New Somerset was developed by 3 different, is that right? Was it 3 different builders?
Yeah, and
it was Freeman, Grantham was Freeman. And then I think Greystone and some of the other streets was another builder.
So the,
The history committee can probably give us an update.
yes, they can do, and I do know that the lots were sold at different times too. It wasn't a single
Yeah.
sale, it was developed differently. Each of the lot. Matt, if we're gonna go ahead with this, I would be very careful with the language you use.
Yeah.
So when you use a term like community character, it has bad associations. I would try using preserve the physical character of the town and work about full development. You it elsewhere in there. So you mean that you're talking about the buildings rather than the people.
Right, yeah, and that's why I specifically kind of highlighted all of those elements, because I recognize that language.
There is another side to this, and I'll put it with this question: is our town's character only compatible with single family homes? Because that's going to come up in the next few years.
Yeah. Here.
So
Well,
I was gonna
I'm
say-
concerned I'm interested in this study, but I'm concerned it could be exorbitantly expensive, more than $100,000, and I'm not sure my interest is sufficient for that price tag. But we may need to go through the RFP process to find that out.
Well, and Chevy Chase View most recently has done it. We could find out from them what the price tag was.
Oh, that'd be great.
And
That'd be great.
they used Chris Jakubiak, who also did Martin's Editions in the town of Chevy Chase.
I'll say that, Matt, in terms of your question of giving you feedback and having another discussion on it, very happy to do that. My first thought was along the lines of what Robin noted, that on multiple levels, we have to be very careful in the language we use and how we shape this. And there's some overlapping kind of objectives in the way I read the RFP right now. So it would be good to, like, if it is indeed everything we have just said in this meeting, that needs to be reflected in that document as a start, for instance, that it's about streamlining legislation. It's about, are we looking at sort of historic district expansion? We are looking at forthcoming sort of, county regulation. Against the backdrop of that, we want to understand XYZ. And I think that, those kinds of things would be good to update.
Yep.
And I wanted to say, and to Steve's point, I agree. I think that this year, this next 6 to 8, 9 month period, you really have your hands, the team really have their hands full. The lighting project is ongoing. You have the pool construction. We have a whole bunch of other pieces.
Good point.
This is like this, and everything we do has political layer to it. Let's just not be naive about that. I mean, look at the pool construction. So I think that requires bandwidth, thoughtfulness, engagement. It just takes up time. So I would caution against when we start this, when we trigger this. I mean, if it's in the spring to early, April, May period is when we kind of launch it, I might be feeling more comfortable in our collective abilities to kind of navigate and manage it.
Concur. Thank you, Kabir. In fact, I don't think there's any rush on this. So depending on how much we have on our plate at the next work session, we may or may not even want to discuss this further at that October work session. It might slide till November.
Well, also, it might be good for Matt to find out a little bit about costs, because we don't have money for this in the budget, right?
Yeah, we didn't budget for it.
So therefore, you're just doing getting some gathering information, and then you probably, unless you're gonna transfer money, you probably don't want to do this till next year anyway.
Agreed.
Because you might have
Ideally,
overruns.
ideally.
You might have overruns in the pool.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if in terms of, I just reveal my cards here, that in terms of sort of priority of reasons, I think extending historic district expansion would be top of my list as a reason for a kind of assessment more than anything else, because that remains personally a blind spot for me on how exactly one goes about doing that. And I see tremendous cascading benefits across multiple areas for us to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Great discussions. These are all the major agenda items. Do you have any further comments, Matt or Mr. Mayor?
I just have one thing. So I read that lovely column that the chair of the Environment Committee wrote about the pesticide thing. And then I came home to my, that this sign is like a violation.
No, they're supposed to write on the tag, what is applied and the date. Looks like they did not.
Well, no, they did, but the thing is, I don't have barley tree experts in my house.
Oh, you mean they did it to in your yard?
Yeah, but also, but remember, the chair said that a lot of people have those signs up there, and was that correct, that indicates that they're violating our law?
No, it not necessarily. The code that we have, what we did was we adopted the county code. We did come up with our own code. And it is lawns really is the focus of the county code. But you can apply pesticides to trees and shrubs and things like that to treat bugs issues. And it's beautification of lawns is the concern. So you can even apply pesticides to lawns when you have an invasion of something that needs to be cleared. But it is to do.
So maybe that should be clarified in an article, because like he basically said in the article, I think, that these signs indicate a violation of the code. And then also, is Bartlett Tree Expert, isn't that our town contract?
No,
So why was this in my yard?
I have no idea.
So I think I'm gonna have the, because I mean, I've seen it, when I walk the dog, I've seen this in other parts of the town. So I think we should have the staff investigate this. Don't you?
Sure.
Don't you think?
Might be a quick call just to find out what they're doing. in the
And do
town.
they know? Yeah, so I just,
Thank you, Matt.
that was so weird.
Anything else?
Are we at the end of our agenda? What's
Yes.
Yeah, we made
Okay.
it through the agenda.
Do you want to add
Awesome.
something, Kabir?
No.
Okay.
I have an anxious puppy here.
You
Who's
got an anxious puppy.
all right, cool. Thank
Shannon has
So
daughter.
see everybody on Monday night.
Thank
Have a good
you.
evening,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
This coming Monday night, no less. That's right.